Hello students, in this video we will talk about outbreeding devices, and these are not physical devices but these are mechanisms in the plants for a particular reasons. What are those? Let us see, and why are these important? Let us learn in this particular video. So by now you have learned that in case of plants, majority of the plants produce bisexual flowers, right? So what do you mean by bisexual flowers? Bisexual flowers are the flowers that are going to present with both the male and female reproductive units. So in case of bisexual flowers, it is easy for the plant to go for self-pollination. Agree? Why self-pollination? Because both the male and female gametes are available and they actually can pollinate very easily. But there is a problem when a particular plant goes for frequent self-pollination. So in case of a frequent self-pollination, frequent self-pollination, it leads to a condition, and that is called inbreeding depression. Okay, so the question is this process or is this event of inbreeding depression useful to the plant or not? So as the name suggests, you have to understand that this particular process of inbreeding depression is actually not beneficial and it is actually harmful. So in this, what actually happens? There is loss of vigor. Okay, now you might ask, sir, what is loss of vigor? Loss of vigor means loss of robustness, right? Loss of the hybrid characters, loss of the good qualities, physical fitness, and that is what typically referred to as the loss of vigor. And the second can be the loss of fertility. Okay, the plant might become less fertile when the plant is going to go for inbreeding depression, or plant is in this particular condition, and in extreme cases it might even be lethal. The plant might die or the animal might die. But in case of plants, a frequent pollination that typically happens in case the plants are going to have the bisexual flower and they're going to have repeated self-pollination for a number of generations, it can lead to the inbreeding depression condition. So to avoid this, right, there is a need for the plants to promote cross-pollination, right? So how to promote cross-pollination? And this cross-pollination is getting promoted with the help of the outbreeding devices. Okay, so these outbreeding devices help the plant to promote the cross-pollination and somehow retard that of the self-pollination process. And when the plants are going to undergo the process of cross-pollination with the outbreeding devices help, then they can basically avoid this harmful process of inbreeding depressions. So what are these different mechanisms that we are referring to as outbreeding devices, which is going to help in the process of promoting or helping in cross-pollination in case of the plant? Now let us talk about the first mechanism. So in the first mechanism, what happens is the pollen grain release, right? Pollen release or maturation, and at the same time the stigma receptivity. Now these two is not going to be synchronized. Stigma receptivity is not synchronized. Okay, now why it is important? When you're going to have the pollen grain and the stigma that are getting they're getting maturation, right, at different point of time, in that case the same pollen or self pollen we call of a particular flower may not be able to or will not be able to pollinate the same flower. For example, you have a flower which is bisexual, and in that flower, let's imagine that the pollen grain is getting matured and released much before the stigma is becoming receptive. In that case, what will happen? The stigma is not receptive. Although the pollen grains are going to be released and falling on the stigma of the cell of the same flower, the stigma simply won't be able to allow the pollination of the pollen grain, thereby preventing the self-pollination. The process can be vice versa also. If the stigma is becoming receptive, it is mature much before the pollen grains are released, then it will receive the pollen grains from different flowers, and then it will promote the cross pollination process. So that is the first mechanism where we are talking about the asynchrony between the pollen grain release and the stigma receptivity. Now the second mechanism, a simple mechanism, is going to be the difference in the position. So here we can write a different position of the stigma and anther. So as you can see here, this is the stigma, and the stigma here is placed much higher than the anthers, right? So what is going to happen when the anther is released? The or anther is going to release the pollen grain. The pollen grains probably will fall downwards rather than going and falling on the stigma. So this process again, the simply by changing the position of the anther and stigma, again the plant is going for the cross pollination. So the second is going to be different position of the stigma and the anther. Now what are the other mechanisms? So the third mechanism that we'll talk about is a genetic mechanism, and it is called self incompatibility. Okay, so what do you mean by self incompatibility? Self incompatibility, as I was talking, is a genetic mechanism. Now what do you mean by genetic mechanism? Here only the self pollens are not going to be allowed to pollinate. So here what is going to happen is it is going to prevent the self pollen. So what do you mean by self pollen? Self pollen means pollen grain of the same flower. It is going to prevent the self pollen from development. Development means what kind of development? Here we can talk about from pollen germination or pollen tube growth. So in this self-incompatibility method, the plant is going to prevent its own pollen, the self pollen, from pollen germination or the pollen tube growth. Again, thereby completely preventing the self-pollination method. And the fourth mechanism that we need to understand is going to be the production of unisexual flower. So production of or development of unisexual flower. So what do you mean by unisexual flower? Unisexual flowers means you're going to have either the male or the female flower. So here we are going to have the male flower, and also we are going to have the female flower, right? So this particular mechanism is going to be different in two different cases. That is, we are going to have let's say the monoecious plant and we are going to have the dioecious plant. In case of monoecious plant, for example, we are going to have the maize. Okay, we are going to have the castor, for example. In these cases, what happens is there are going to be male and female flower. Okay, male and female flower on the same plant. Okay, we are going to have a unisexual flower, but here because they are monoecious, the male and female flower is going to be on the same plant. In this case, the plant production of unisexual flower, it is going to prevent autogamy but not geitonogamy, right? So we are talking about cross pollination here. We are talking about bringing genetically different pollen grain to the flower. So you know that in case of geitonogamy, it is a kind of functionally cross pollination, but genetically they are similar to autogamy. When we talk about dioecious plant, for example, we are talking about papaya, right? In this, what happens? There are two different plants, that is male and female flowers are developed in male and female plants. So here we are going to have two different plants, and both of these plants are going to develop or they are going to carry only one type of flowers. So here what is going to happen? Here it is going to prevent both autogamy and heterogamy, right? In this case, we are going to have two different plants that are going to have the two different flowers, and the flowers can be either male and the female depending on the male and the female plants. And when the pollens are going to come, it is coming from a different plant. So here the pollination is invariably xenogamy. Remember this, it is going to be invariably xenogamy when the plants are going to be producing the unisexual flowers, and they are going to be produced in a dioecious plants like papaya. They're going to prevent both autogamy and heterogamy, and thereby promoting cross pollination, that is xenogamy. So again, to summarize, we are going to have the four different mechanisms of outbreeding devices that we are talking about, and these outbreeding devices include the asynchroning or different timings of the maturation of the pollen grain and the stigma, the difference in the position of the stigma and anther. The third is going to be self-incompatibility, that is a genetic mechanism, and the fourth, the production of unisexual flowers. So these are the mechanisms of the outbreeding devices. Dear students, these are very important concepts, and many a times they have been asked in the board examinations, and you should try to understand these concepts properly. Thank you for watching this video.